I am innocent. The incident that happened that night was not my fault. I did not have a gun. All I can ask is that you look deeper into this case so that you really can finally see the truth. I ask my family and friends to continue to fight this fight." Those were Troy Davis's final words before Georgia executed him on September 21st, 2011. But here's what makes those words absolutely haunting. 7 of the 9 witnesses who put him on death row later said they lied. No murder weapon was ever found. No DNA evidence linked him to the crime. No fingerprints connected him to the shooting. Yet Georgia executed him anyway. Troy Davis's case became one of the most internationally watched death penalty cases in American history. Presidents, popes, and celebrities begged Georgia to spare his life. Over 1 million people signed petitions demanding a new trial, but none of it mattered. Today we're diving into a case that divided the world and raised fundamental questions about eyewitness testimony, police investigations, and the death penalty itself. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Troy Davis's execution haunts people around the globe. Make sure you subscribe and hit that notification bell because this case will challenge everything you believe about justice and prove that sometimes the system fails in the most public way possible. August 19, 1989 was a hot Saturday night in Savannah, Georgia. The city's historic district was alive with people enjoying the weekend. Tourists walked the cobblestone streets. Locals gathered at restaurants and bars. It seemed like a perfect summer evening. At around 1:15 a.m., 27-year-old Mark McPhail was working as a security guard at a Burger King on West Oglethorpe Avenue. McPhail was an off-duty Savannah police officer picking up extra money to support his family. He had a wife, Joan, and 2 young children. He was known as one of the good guys, a cop who genuinely cared about his community. That night, McPhail heard a commotion in the parking lot behind the restaurant. A homeless man named Larry Young was being beaten and robbed. Without hesitation, McPhail ran toward the disturbance to help. What happened next would destroy multiple families and create one of the most controversial death penalty cases in American history. As McPhail approached the scene, someone shot him. The bullet struck him in the face, killing him instantly. The 27-year-old officer collapsed in the Burger King parking lot, leaving behind a devastated family and a community demanding justice. The shooting sent shockwaves through Savannah. A police officer had been murdered while trying to help someone in need. The entire police force mobilized to find the killer. They interviewed witnesses, collected evidence, and followed every lead. Within 2 days, they had their suspect, 20-year-old Troy Anthony Davis. Troy was a young black man from Savannah's east side. He came from a working-class family and had no serious criminal record. But according to witnesses, he was the one who pulled the trigger that night. He was the one who murdered Officer Mark McPhail in cold blood. Troy Davis was arrested on August 23, 1989, just 4 days after the shooting. He was charged with murder, armed robbery, and aggravated assault. If convicted, he would face the death penalty. From the moment of his arrest, Troy Davis maintained his complete innocence. He said he wasn't even at the Burger King that night. He claimed he was nowhere near the scene when Officer McPhail was killed. But the witnesses said otherwise. And in 1989, witness testimony was considered the gold standard of evidence. The prosecution's case against Troy Davis seemed overwhelming. 9 different witnesses identified him as the shooter. The evidence appeared so strong that many people wondered why Davis was even bothering to claim innocence. The star witness was Sylvester "Red" Coles. Coles told police that he had been at the Burger King that night with Troy Davis and several other people. According to Coles, Davis had been harassing Larry Young, the homeless man, demanding money and beer. When Young refused, Davis became angry and started beating him. Coles said that when Officer McPhail approached, Davis pulled out a gun and shot him without warning. Then Davis and the others fled the scene, leaving McPhail dying in the parking lot. But Coles wasn't the only witness. 8 other people came forward to identify Troy Davis as the shooter. Some claimed they saw him pull the gun. Others said they saw him running from the scene. Several witnesses said they heard Davis bragging about killing a cop. Dorothy Farrell, who lived in a nearby apartment, told police she saw the whole thing from her window. She identified Troy Davis as the shooter and said she watched him flee after killing McPhail. Darrell Collins, who was at the Burger King that night, also pointed the finger at Davis. Collins said he saw Davis shoot McPhail and then run away. Antoine Williams claimed that Davis had confessed to him the next day, bragging about killing a police officer. The defense argued that the witnesses were mistaken or lying. They suggested that Sylvester Coles, who had his own criminal history, might be trying to pin the murder on Davis to save himself. But without physical evidence to support their theory, the defense struggled to create reasonable doubt. There was no murder weapon found at the scene, no fingerprints on any evidence, no DNA linking Davis to the crime. The case would rise or fall entirely on eyewitness testimony. In a southern city in 1989, with a dead police officer and multiple witnesses identifying a suspect, that testimony seemed like more than enough. Troy Davis's trial began in August 1991, exactly 2 years after Officer MacPhail's murder. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Spencer Lawton, was determined to secure a death sentence for the man who had killed one of Savannah's finest. The trial took place in a charged atmosphere. The courtroom was packed with police officers, MacPhail's family and friends, and members of the community demanding justice. The pressure for a conviction was enormous. One by one, the prosecution called their witnesses to testify. Sylvester Coles took the stand and repeated his story about seeing Davis shoot MacPhail. Dorothy Farrell testified about watching the shooting from her apartment window. Darrell Collins described seeing Davis pull the trigger. The witnesses seemed confident in their identifications. They looked the jury in the eyes and swore that Troy Davis was the man who had murdered Officer MacPhail. Their testimony was emotional and compelling. But Troy Davis's defense team, led by attorney Bobby Hill, fought back aggressively. They attacked the reliability of the eyewitness identifications, pointing out inconsistencies in the witnesses' statements. They highlighted the poor lighting conditions at the scene and the chaos that followed the shooting. Most importantly, they focused on Sylvester Coles. The defense argued that Coles was the real shooter and was trying to frame Davis to avoid prosecution himself. They pointed out that Coles had been wearing a white shirt that night, the same color shirt that several witnesses initially said the shooter was wearing. Davis had been wearing a yellow shirt. The defense also raised questions about how the investigation was conducted. They argued that police had focused on Davis too quickly and hadn't properly investigated other suspects, including Coles. But the prosecution had a powerful closing argument. 9 witnesses had identified Troy Davis as the shooter. These weren't confused or mistaken people. They were citizens who had witnessed a horrible crime and were brave enough to testify about what they saw. District Attorney Lawton told the jury that this was about more than just one murder. This was about whether police officers could do their jobs safely. This was about whether good Samaritans like Mark MacPhail could help others without fear of being gunned down. The jury deliberated for 7 hours over 2 days. On August 28, 1991, they returned with their verdict: guilty of murder, guilty of armed robbery, guilty of aggravated assault. 3 days later, the same jury sentenced Troy Davis to death. Troy Davis, at just 22 years old, was headed to Georgia's death row for murdering a police officer. He continued to maintain his innocence, but it seemed like his fate was sealed. Troy Davis arrived on Georgia's death row in September 1991. He would spend the next 20 years there, fighting for his life and maintaining his innocence every single day. Death row at Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson was a brutal place. Davis was locked in a small cell for 23 hours a day. His only human contact came during brief visits from family members, attorneys, and supporters who believed in his innocence. But Troy Davis refused to give up hope. He spent his time reading, writing letters, and working with his legal team on appeals. He also became deeply religious, finding strength in his faith during the darkest moments. As the years passed, something remarkable began to happen. The case that had seemed so solid in 1991 started to fall apart. It began with small doubts and inconsistencies. Defense investigators started re-interviewing the witnesses who had testified at trial. What they discovered was shocking. In 1996, 5 years after the trial, Darrell Collins contacted Davis's attorneys. Collins had been one of the key witnesses, testifying that he saw Davis shoot MacPhail. But now Collins said he had lied. He claimed that police had pressured him to identify Davis and that he hadn't actually seen who fired the shot. Collins wasn't the only witness having second thoughts. Dorothy Farrell, who had testified about seeing the shooting from her apartment window, also recanted her testimony. She said police had coerced her into identifying Davis and that she hadn't actually seen the shooting clearly. One by one, other witnesses began changing their stories. Antoine Williams, who claimed Davis had confessed to him, now said he had made up the story because police promised to help him with his own legal troubles. By the early 2000s, 7 out of the 9 witnesses who had testified against Troy Davis at trial had either recanted their testimony or significantly changed their stories. They claimed they had been pressured by police, threatened, or simply mistaken in their original identifications. Only 2 witnesses maintained their original testimony, Sylvester Coles and 1 other person. But new witnesses were also coming forward. People who had been at the Burger King that night but hadn't testified at trial began telling a different story. Some said they saw Sylvester Coles with a gun. Others said Coles had bragged about the shooting. Several witnesses now pointed to Coles as the real killer. Troy Davis's legal team was stunned. The case that had seemed so overwhelming in 1991 was built on testimony that was now crumbling. 7 witnesses had recanted. New evidence pointed to a different suspect. Yet Davis remained on death row. As evidence of Troy Davis's possible innocence mounted, his case began attracting national attention. Legal advocacy groups, civil rights organizations, and anti-death penalty activists took up his cause. They argued that Georgia was preparing to execute an innocent man based on false testimony. The campaign to save Troy Davis was unlike anything seen before in a death penalty case. It combined traditional legal appeals with modern social media activism and international pressure. Davis's legal team, now led by attorneys Jason Ewart and Thomas Ruffin, filed motion after motion asking for a new trial. They presented the recanted testimony, the new witness statements, and evidence pointing to Sylvester Coles as the real shooter. But Georgia's courts were reluctant to overturn a 20-year-old conviction based on recanted testimony. Appeals courts noted that witnesses sometimes change their stories for various reasons, and that recantations are often unreliable. In 2007, Davis's execution was scheduled for July 17th. With just days to go, his supporters launched a massive public campaign. The NAACP, Amnesty International, and other organizations organized protests and petition drives. Most remarkably, the campaign went global. Pope Benedict XVI called for clemency. Former President Jimmy Carter asked Georgia to spare Davis's life. Nobel Peace Prize winners Desmond Tutu and Al Gore added their voices to the chorus. The pressure worked. Just 90 minutes before his scheduled execution, the Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles granted a stay to review new evidence. But the reprieve was temporary. In 2008, the parole board denied clemency, and Davis's execution was rescheduled. Again, international pressure led to another stay. The case that had started in a Burger King parking lot in Savannah was now making headlines around the world. Troy Davis had become a symbol of everything wrong with the American death penalty system. In 2009, something unprecedented happened. The U.S. Supreme Court ordered a federal court to hold a hearing on Davis's innocence claims. It was extraordinarily rare for the Supreme Court to intervene in this way, especially in a death penalty case. The federal hearing was Davis's best chance to prove his innocence. For the first time, all the recanted testimony and new evidence would be presented to a federal judge who could order a new trial. But the hearing didn't go as Davis's supporters had hoped. While several witnesses testified that they had lied at the original trial, the federal judge ruled that the new evidence wasn't strong enough to prove Davis's innocence by clear and convincing evidence. The legal system had given Troy Davis his day in court, and he had lost. His execution was rescheduled for September 21, 2011. As Troy Davis's final execution date approached, his case became an international cause. The campaign to save his life was unlike anything seen before in American criminal justice history. Social media exploded with support for Davis. The hashtag #TooMuchDoubt trended worldwide. Over 1 million people signed online petitions asking Georgia to commute his sentence to life in prison. Celebrity supporters included everyone from Kim Kardashian to Russell Simmons to Sean Penn. Musicians, actors, and athletes used their platforms to raise awareness about Davis's case. But the most powerful voices came from an unexpected source: conservative leaders who normally supported the death penalty. Former FBI Director William Sessions said there was too much doubt about Davis's guilt to proceed with execution. Republican former Congressman Bob Barr called for clemency. Even some prosecutors and judges began expressing doubts. These weren't liberal activists or defense attorneys. These were law and order conservatives who believed the system had failed in Davis's case. The international pressure was extraordinary. European Union officials called on Georgia to spare Davis's life. The Council of Europe, representing 47 countries, passed a resolution calling his case a miscarriage of justice. But Georgia officials remained unmoved. Governor Nathan Deal said he would not intervene in the case. The Georgia Board of Pardons and Paroles, despite reviewing the case multiple times, refused to grant clemency. District Attorney Larry Chisholm, who had inherited the case from Spencer Lawton, defended the conviction. He argued that Davis had received multiple fair hearings and that the evidence still supported his guilt. The MacPhail family also supported the execution. Mark MacPhail's mother, Annalise MacPhail, said she believed Davis was guilty and that her family deserved justice after waiting over 20 years. On September 20, 2011, the day before the scheduled execution, protests erupted around the world. Vigils were held in Times Square, outside the White House, and in cities across Europe. The eyes of the world were on Georgia. Davis's attorneys filed last-minute appeals to every court that would hear them. The Supreme Court received 3 separate emergency petitions asking for a stay of execution. But one by one, the appeals were denied. The Supreme Court, which had once ordered a hearing on Davis's innocence, now declined to intervene. Georgia was going to execute Troy Davis despite the international outcry and serious questions about his guilt. September 21, 2011, began with Troy Davis still hoping for a miracle. His attorneys continued filing appeals even as the execution hour approached. Protesters gathered outside the Georgia Diagnostic and Classification Prison in Jackson, holding vigils and praying for clemency. Davis spent his final day meeting with family members, his spiritual advisors, and his legal team. He remained calm and peaceful, according to those who visited him. He continued to maintain his innocence and expressed hope that the truth would eventually come out. His last meal was simple: a cheeseburger, French fries, and a soda. He had written final letters to his family and supporters, thanking them for their faith in his innocence and asking them to continue fighting for justice. At 7 p.m., 3 hours before the scheduled execution, Davis's attorneys filed their final appeal with the U.S. Supreme Court. The execution was delayed while the court considered the petition. For 4 agonizing hours, the world waited. Davis remained strapped to the gurney in the execution chamber while his fate hung in the balance. His family and supporters prayed that the delay meant the court would grant a stay. At 10:53 p.m., word came from Washington. The Supreme Court had denied the stay. Troy Davis would be executed. The warden asked if Davis had any final words. Looking toward the witness room where Mark MacPhail's family sat, Davis spoke clearly and calmly. "I'd like to address the MacPhail family. Let you know, despite the situation you are in, I'm not the one who personally killed your son, your father, your brother. I am innocent. The incident that happened that night was not my fault. I did not have a gun. All I can ask is that you look deeper into this case so that you really can finally see the truth." He then turned to his own family and supporters. "I ask my family and friends to continue to fight this fight. For those about to take my life, God have mercy on your souls. And may God bless your souls." At 11 p.m., the lethal injection began. Troy Davis was pronounced dead at 11:08 p.m. on September 21, 2011. He was 42 years old. Outside the prison, hundreds of protesters wept and prayed. Around the world, people who had followed Davis's case for years mourned what they saw as a terrible miscarriage of justice. More than 12 years after Troy Davis's execution, his case continues to generate debate and soul-searching about the American justice system. Was Troy Davis guilty of murdering Officer Mark MacPhail? The truth is, we may never know for certain. The physical evidence was limited, and the case depended almost entirely on eyewitness testimony that later proved unreliable. But we also know that not all witnesses recanted. We know that some people who knew Davis claimed he had confessed to them. We know that he was at or near the scene that night, even by his own admission. The reality is that this case fell into a gray area that the American legal system struggles to handle. The international attention focused on Davis's case forced Americans to confront uncomfortable questions about their justice system. How reliable is eyewitness testimony? How much doubt is too much doubt when someone's life is at stake? Should the death penalty be used when there are serious questions about guilt? These are questions that go far beyond Troy Davis's individual case. They touch on fundamental issues about justice, mercy, and the role of government in taking lives. Troy Davis died maintaining his innocence, just as he had for over 20 years. His final words asking people to look deeper into this case continue to resonate with those who followed his story. Whether Davis was guilty or innocent, his case exposed serious flaws in how the American justice system handles death penalty cases. It showed how eyewitness testimony, once considered the gold standard of evidence, can be unreliable and subject to change over time. It demonstrated how difficult it is for the legal system to correct mistakes once they've been made. Even when new evidence emerges, the appeals process is designed more to ensure finality than to ensure accuracy. Most importantly, Davis's case became a symbol of the irreversible nature of capital punishment. Once someone is executed, there's no opportunity to correct errors or consider new evidence. Death is final in a way that life imprisonment is not. Troy Davis's execution didn't end the death penalty in America, but it changed the conversation around it. Politicians, judges, and prosecutors became more cautious about death penalty cases. Some states imposed moratoriums or abolished capital punishment entirely. If you enjoyed this video, check out our channel for more death row stories.